Welcome back, chess friends. Labordne is winning 5 games to 4 and he only needs to win one more game to win this third match. He's also French and he's quite pleased with how his team is doing in the World Cup. Big Mac is from Ireland and he's a bit disappointed his team didn't even qualify. But on the other hand, he's not going to get embarrassed by any idiotic political signalling on an international stage. Baldric is English.
And the English team in white shirts give the Nazi salute during the German national anthem.
Let's begin. Labordne starts with d4, we have d5, and then c4, the Queen's Gambit. And of course, everybody knows that a gentleman must accept a gambit, and McDonald accepts. We continue with e3, e5, and the bishop captures the pawn. The pawns exchange in the center. Knight to f6 from McDonald, knight to c3 from Labordne, and McDonald goes for bishop to d6 as approved by Morphy. Knight to f3 from Labordne now, and up to this point they've played the same moves as in match 3, game 7. In that game, at this point, McDonald castled, but he decides to switch it up a little bit this time, and he plays his knight out to c6 instead. So both sides jockeying for position in the midfield, and now they both castle, also looking to strengthen their defense. And they don't want to give each other too much space on the wings, so they go for h3, h6, and a3 on the other side. And here McDonald decides to develop his light square bishop to f5, trying to dominate the midfield a little bit more. It seems perhaps as if McDonald is playing a bit more conservatively than he has previously, so much so that Labordne has just had enough and he decides to go for his own rush forward on the king side, attempting to kick away the bishop. But Big Mac says, "Is that all you've got?" and immediately sends off his horse. So the pawn captures back and the bishop captures the pawn. Now, a decent defensive play might be king to g2, but instead Labordne brings his bishop back from the midfield to help the defenders. McDonald sends his players forwards and the bishop tackles the bishop and the queen comes to h4. Now, McDonald is going for the corner here, so Labordne really needs to give his king some space. He moves his rook aside so the king is able to escape to f1 should the queen come in. But this leaves the knight open to tackle the pawn. Labordne's king is looking quite exposed, so he calls for more defenders. The knight comes over to e4 to help, but McDonald's attack is relentless. The bishop comes sliding into h2 with check. Some of the crowd appeal for offside, but the game continues. King to f1. Baldric here suggests the queen coming to h3, delivering a check, but after the bishop intercepts, McDonald's attack will run out of steam and Labordne will be winning. He is still a piece up. So instead of this queen move, the rook comes across to d8, x-raying the queen down the center, and Labordne decides to develop his dark square bishop to e3. And the knight now comes across to f5, revealing the attack on the white queen, whilst also attacking the dark square bishop. Queen to c2, moving out of the way of the rook, and now queen to h3, as Baldric suggested a couple of moves ago. Bishop to g2, trying to form a wall, and we have queen back to g4. f3, and this time he manages to kick away the queen all the way to g6, and the bishop comes back to f2, again trying to form a defensive line in front of the king. The knight goes back to e7, the rook comes across to d1, and the knight now comes forward to d5, so McDonald's players are trying to regroup for another attack. Here, Labordne sends his players on a counter-offensive, bishop to c5, attacking the rook, but McDonald just plays his queen across the centre of the pitch to c6, and now if the bishop moves, he's picking up the queen. So Labordne breaks this with queen to b3, and now McDonald decides that it's fine for his rook to be sent off. He plays his knight forward to f4 and leaves the bishop to tackle the rook. However, he doesn't capture the bishop back here straight away. Instead, he goes for a check on the wing with a6. So now the king moves to f2 and the rook comes flying in with a brutal sliding tackle to d1. Now, up to this point, the game's actually been quite even. Labordne should probably capture the rook with the queen and he'll be fine, but instead he plays his bishop to f1 to attack the black queen, and this is actually a little bit of an own goal. So I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to see if you can spot McDonald's next move. You can even pause the video if you like. So You shouldn't do what Baldric suggests, which is to capture the bishop with the queen here. Instead, you should do what Macdonald actually played, which was bishop to g1 with check. Now, again, there are some appeals for offside against the bishop, but it's fine. He was actually level with the king when he was played forward. So the king captures the bishop here, the rook captures the rook, and now the bishop is pinged against the king and it can't tackle the queen anymore because it can't move. So what does Le Bourdonnais do? He's under a lot of pressure. The queen's coming in to capture the bishop, backed up by the rook, with the knight defending the square in front of the king. He decides to bring his knight back to d2 to help defend the bishop, but Macdonald plays a very nice move. The queen comes into e2. Of course, the bishop still can't capture the queen, it's still pinned. And the threat here is queen to g2, checkmate, because, again, the rook's pinning the bishop can't capture back, and the king can't capture it because it will be protected by the knight. So what does Le Bourdonnais do? Well, he resigned the game, so great job, Macdonald. The only thing Le Bourdonnais would have been able to do here would be to give up his queen to delay the checkmate a little bit longer. After the king tackles, he's going to have to do a useless move with a pawn or move the knight somewhere useless, and of course the queen is coming in. So Macdonald has managed to win 3 in a row to level the score at 5 games all. Great stuff from him. Join me again next time for the match 3 final. See you then.